Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Newscap. This week, I decided that it is time once again to do the top 5 news stories of the week. So I'm drinking Modelo's today, and I have to say, they are not as good as Coronas, and I should have gone with Coronas. I should have sticking with the bread and butter. Always stick with the bread and butter, always. Another week down, and we are almost entering into the 4th month of 2022. That's crazy. These news cycles seem to go so fast, and they make time fly by. But I guess when you get older, that's kind of what happens, I'm told. So the top 5 stories today involve 2 US consulates being attacked, a cartel leader being captured, President Zelensky cracking down like an authoritarian leader, and the U.S. warning China not to extend a lifeline to Russia. So, with that being said, we are going to get into the first story. The first story is Iran launches missiles into Iraq. On the morning of March 13th, 12 total missiles hit near the US Consulate in Iraq, damaging mostly buildings. No Americans were hurt, and only one person reported being injured. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard said that they were targeting an Israeli strategic center that was located in the Iraqi Kurdish city of Erbil. The Israeli government and military declined to comment on the attack, while the Kurdish officials accused Iran's Revolutionary Guard of seeking to use baseless propaganda to justify targeting civilian locations. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard has told Israel that they will pay for an airstrike on March 7th that resulted in the death of 2 senior Iranian officers. This comes several months after U.S. forces stationed at Erbil's international airport complex received fire from rockets as well as drone attacks. This is an event U.S. officials attributed to Iranian-backed rebel groups. And since the killing of Soleimani back in 2020, Iran and Iranian-backed forces have been open and willing to target U.S. forces across the globe. Man, these Iranians have it pretty tough. They keep getting their officers taken out by airstrikes and drone strikes in Syria specifically. Now, they kind of retaliate with little tantrums and everything and talk a big rhetoric saying that they're going to make people pay. And then in reality, their attacks kind of are light-footed. Yeah, they're pretty light-footed for the most part. The second news story that I wanted to talk about today involves China possibly extending an olive branch to the Russians. It was speculated that Russia reached out to China and was asking for some military aid in their ongoing campaign in the Ukraine, but the Chinese seemed to have no idea what the United States was talking about and accused the United States of disinformation. So according to a BBC article on March 13th, some unnamed U.S. officials told multiple news outlets that China has signaled a willingness to provide military aid to Russia in the Ukraine. The report came out as National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan met China's top diplomat Yang Jiechi in Rome for discussions. During an earlier CNN interview, Sullivan said that the U.S. was communicating directly and privately with Beijing and that there would absolutely be consequences for large-scale sanction evasion efforts that would support Russia. We will not allow that to go forward and allow there to be a lifeline to Russia from these economic sanctions from any country anywhere in the world. In response, a spokesperson for the Foreign Ministry, Zhao Lijiang, said that the U.S. had been spreading disinformation targeting China on the Ukraine issue with malicious intentions. Putin's spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, also said that reports that they had asked China for military assistance were untrue and followed up with, Russia possesses its own independent potential to continue the operation. As we said, it is going according to plan and we will be completed in time and in full. China has yet to condemn Russia for the invasion of the Ukraine, and they have also said that Russia does possess legitimate security concerns and that they should be taken serious. At the same time, China has expressed unwavering support for Ukrainian sovereignty and has actually tossed about I think $100,000 to the Ukrainian cause, which, $100,000 in the Chinese government is like a smack in the face almost. It's like to show the world, hey, we donated $100,000, so you guys can't say that we haven't contributed or that we aren't doing enough to try to end the invasion. You know, China does probably have a point that this is probably United States disinformation. You can't really trust any propaganda that is using unnamed officials. You know, that's unnamed officials. They could say anything and could be reported at anything. And I think the Washington Post broke this story, and they obviously have had their issues of starting fake news stories and pushing fake news stories. And the Chinese kind of seem taken aback by that and be like, no, like this is incorrect. Like, you guys are spreading misinformation. There's no record, there's no sources of anything like that happening. In the meeting that took place in Rome between Jake Sullivan and the Chinese top diplomat, they said that they were there to talk about areas in the world where the United States can cooperate with the Chinese. So they weren't there to discuss anything that was involved in the Russian invasion. And a matter of fact, the spokesperson from China didn't even mention the Ukraine in the post interview of the meeting. But, you know, China is in a unique position too, because they did enter into a no limits partnership at the start of the Olympics. And that didn't disclude military aid to being sent to Russia. You know, the United States says, oh, we won't accept you guys doing that. But in reality, every country is free to choose what they want to do. Now, there would be implications for the Chinese economy. You have the access to the European Union and the United States economies. Now, those are the two largest trading partners with China, is Europe and the United States. So they're in a position to where if they do provide any kind of aid to Russia, they'll probably have a large portion of their exports cut off, which would, you know, it would damage the Chinese economy for, you know, for some time to come. I don't think China would be that slow in thinking. I think that actually, if Russia did disclose that they had ambitions to invade Ukraine, I think China may have, you know, taken that opportunity to be like, okay, well, go ahead and do it. We might assist you in it, but in reality, they're probably like, you know, let's see how this plays out for Russia. Let's see what the world is going to respond to, what the United States does, all while weakening the Russian position. You know, it kind of it self-eliminates Russia from the superpower equation, and now China can focus on the United States and the rest of Europe. I think it was probably a power play where Xi Jinping was like, okay, man, we might help you, but at the same time, go ahead and show your hand so I know how you're playing, and then I can make, you know, my decisions moving forward. Because the Chinese have avoided war. And so, you know, they're thinking of the long haul. I think I've said it in previous videos that China is playing the long game. So I don't see them doing anything drastic to hinder their monetary policies. I think they want to collect a check. I think they want to continue developing, investing in their military, and not do anything to jeopardize international trade, especially when it comes down to Russia. Let's move into our third news story of the day. This is the US Consulate in Mexico, as well as military installations in Mexico, were targeted by the cartel's gang when their cartel leader was arrested. So on the night of March 13th and into March 14th, the US Consulate building, along with 22 Mexican military installations, were hit by gunfire following the security forces' arrest of cartel leader Juan Gerardo Trevino. They call him El Huevo, which is in English, the egg, which I don't see that all being that intimidating. The egg, I mean, clearly they cracked his egg. Trevino was identified as the leader and founder of the Northeastern Cartel, which is a successor to the Zetas gang. He oversaw an assassin squad locally known as the Tropas del Infierno, or the Troops from Hell. Now, his uncle was supposedly the leader of the Zetas gang as well, but he was recently arrested I think a few years ago for money laundering and all that good stuff. Upon word of his arrest, the cartel retaliated by firing at the US Consulate and also 22 Mexican military installations. And to slow traffic and prevent people from entering the area, the cartel set up 16 different roadblocks to kind of direct traffic. Along with the roadblocks, vehicles were set ablaze, exits were blocked off, and they created like I guess you could say possibly a kill zone. There wasn't really much details on how things unfolded, but it kind of seemed like they were setting up a kill zone. They were trying to disable vehicles, and they were obviously firing. Mexico was forced to mobilize 700 military personnel and 4 helicopters to secure the scene following that demonstration or attack. I mean, it's hard to kind of determine the difference between the two, but the cartel violence nonetheless was throttled up that night of his arrest. Trevino is an American citizen. He's not a Mexican citizen, and because of that, he was deported, or extradited rather, to the United States on March 15th. He was on the Border Patrol's most wanted list since October of 2019, and they had gotten him. So Trevino is the nephew of the imprisoned Zetas cartel leader, Miguel Angel Trevino. So both are facing extradition orders for drug trafficking and money laundering. Juan Trevino is also facing extortion and criminal association, as well as murder and terrorism charges in the Mexican state of Coahuila. If convicted in the United States, he will spend the rest of his days behind bars in prison. The Northeastern Cartel mainly operates out of Tamaulipas, but also maintains its presence in the states of Coahuila, Monterrey, and Zacatecas. On Wednesday, March 16th, the United States authorized the departure of non-emergency U.S. government personnel and eligible family members due to security concerns. You know, from being on a border town, it's pretty scary when the cartel is in your backyard. And, you know, everybody knows that the cartel are extremely violent, and there's a lot of kidnappings, missing persons reported, beheadings, and overall just drug and human trafficking. And matter of fact, for my area in Arizona, the past year for sure, border crossings, smuggling, and human trafficking have gone through the roof. It seems like every week I am going on Facebook and seeing the increased Border Patrol presence and police chases that end up happening due to our borders being unsecured. I think in the coming years, we have to address our borders not being secured. I have witnessed in this past year many people in my hometown being struck, killed, and maimed from these vehicles who are fleeing from law enforcement officers. This one lady's truck, God rest her soul, please. She had her vehicle struck by a fleeing vehicle that was traveling over 100 miles an hour as she was bypassing the light. She was actually on the way to dinner with her son to celebrate her 65th birthday. And he had told reporters that she was looking forward to retiring later in the year. Now, that is a senseless killing, but unfortunately, it comes with the territory where cartels operate or near. So that is extremely sad. And so the real life implications of having an unsecured border or having these criminal organizations running amok right outside of our borders, it's real. And if you are anywhere else in the United States and you don't live near or on a border, the problem is as big as people make it out to be. I encourage all of you guys to get in contact with your local representatives and try to bring awareness to the southern border primarily. If you made it this far, click the like and subscription button. It would be greatly appreciated, guys. You are helping me grow this channel. All right, so this brings us to our fourth news story of the week. Now, this has to do with President Zelensky out of the Ukraine restricting political opponents or political opposition parties and also cracking down on private TV media. So on March 19th and March 20th, President Zelensky invoked his emergency powers under martial law to suppress several opposition political parties and implement a unified information policy. On Sunday, March 20th, Zelensky announced a temporary ban on any activity for 11 political parties because of their alleged links to Russia. This includes the largest opposition party that has 43 out of 450 seats, I believe, in the Ukrainian parliament, and that party is called the For Life Party. The For Life political party, which is accused of being a pro-Russian party, is headed by Yuri Boyko. And actually on March 6th or March 7th, I don't remember the date exactly, he came out and demanded that Russia stop the aggression towards the Ukraine. So if he was that pro-Russian, he would probably, encourage the Russian invasion. I'm not sure. Maybe he's just saving face. I'm not sure. I don't know the guy personally. But on the other hand, the people of the Ukraine do know their political parties. So I don't think it's a government responsibility to shut down any kind of dissent from the governing board, right? That's kind of a red flag for me personally because, the citizenry are intelligent enough to understand where a threat is coming from for the most part, right? Okay, that's a thin line. I'm not going to walk that back, but that's a thin line. That kind of plays into what I am about to discuss right now with the TV news stations. So along with the sanctioning of all these political parties for any activity until martial law is lifted, this policy also involves combining all national TV channels, which typically consist of information and information analytical programs, into one information platform to be called United News. So this essentially ends private TV media in the Ukraine until further notice. So Zelensky felt this measure necessary to combat Russian misinformation and to tell the truth about the war. But like I just said, I don't think it's a government responsibility to tell, your citizenry what is true and what is not true, right? So, I mean, to a degree, maybe following the conflict, it is important to straighten out what is fact and what is fiction. But during the war, I want my government to be focusing on the sole task at hand, which would be defeating the enemy. I don't want my government telling the people, the American citizenry, what is true, what is not true. I mean, leave that to the journalists. The journalists will filter through, like here in America, we know which news channels have a specific bias, right? We know which news channels want us to think in a specific way. So I think the same can be applied to news stations across the world. The citizenry will know, I think to a large degree, what is truth and what is not. So for President Zelensky to feel the need to act as an authoritarian type of government and censor the news and also limit political opposition in activity entirely. Ooh, big red flags going off for me there. And am I wrong for saying that I don't support Russia or the Ukraine at this point? I stand with the people of Ukraine. I can sympathize with their cause, right? They are needlessly involved in a war between two governments, right? And the citizen always pays the price. And it's unfortunate to say that. So I guess I will give a quick example of what I don't like about President Zelensky that he's done over the past couple weeks. The first, obviously, is what I just talked about right now, shutting down the news organizations and also shutting down any activity from political opposition. Those are traits of an authoritarian government. The second thing would be he allowed basically photos of him to be circulated around the internet and used globally of him, wearing his tactical vest and all that, only to find out that was propaganda. Those photos were taken over a year ago, I think 2 years ago, 1 or 2 years ago. And maybe that doesn't fall directly on his shoulders, but nonetheless, I mean, maybe he used it to spur the troops, right? Rally the troops, show his citizenry that he's about that action and stuff. But, when eventually the bubble gets popped, it's a hard image to recover from. It makes people be like, well, why did that propaganda get pushed around the world as if it was taken during the war? So, yeah, the second thing. And so the third thing that I really didn't like about what he did is he was calling upon NATO to close the airspace over Ukraine. Now, I understand why he's doing that, but also for the average person or the viewer that might not know this, if the United States or NATO decided to close the airspace over the Ukraine, we would be obligated to shoot down any Russian aircraft flying in Ukrainian airspace. Now, if we shoot down a Russian aircraft, that is direct involvement into the war and conflict, and therefore we would be declaring war on Russia, which in all essence, that would create a World War III. So this dude was calling for that to happen. He has to understand the risks that NATO takes upon themselves if we were to do that. When you have regional conflicts like this, you do not want escalation. Escalation leads to more civilian casualties. You want to de-escalate the situation and keep it local. I know that sucks for the Ukrainian people to hear that, but that is what you have to do. I also attribute the lack of Ukrainian air control as a direct failure of planning, right? So everybody knows in a modern conflict, the person that has air superiority has the upper hand. If they weren't ready for the Russian invasion, I mean, man, there's ways to avoid war, and they dropped the ball. All right, let's get into our final news story of the week. So this involves Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. He made a historic visit to the United Arab Emirates for the first time in over about a decade, right? So Bashar al-Assad arrived in the United Arab Emirates, the UAE, on March 18th to meet with various rulers who showed a willingness to strengthen ties between them and Syria once again. Once the Syrian conflict started back in 2011, many of its Arab neighbors decided, whoa, we don't want to get involved in this situation. We are going to basically distance ourselves. And that led to Bashar al-Assad being isolated from his Arab allies. So Bashar al-Assad arrived in the United Arab Emirates, the UAE, on March 18th and met with various rulers who signaled a willingness to strengthen ties with Syria once again. Over his visit, Assad met with the ruler of Dubai, Sheikh Mohammed Al Maktoum. I think is how you pronounce his name. Then he went on to meet the ruler of Abu Dhabi, which is the capital of the UAE, to meet with Crown Prince Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. The leaders discussed how the UAE could provide political and humanitarian support to Syria and ways to promote economic trade between the nations. So until now, Assad has only left his country to visit Russia and Vladimir Putin, as well as Iran, which are both backers militarily of his regime. So he was losing large geographical areas of his country over the past decade, and Russia and Iran kind of both supported him militarily, and now he has regained a lot of his territory. So these relations have increased between the UAE and Syria, and in 2018, the UAE actually reopened its embassy in the Syrian capital of Damascus. And in November of 2021, diplomats were sent to Syria to meet with Bashar al-Assad. The US said that they were profoundly disappointed and troubled by the UAE's decision to welcome Assad. Even if slow, any relational improvement between Syria and the UAE would be a lifeline to Assad's government, which has been demolished by Western sanctions and international isolation. So I just wanted to go into a little background of what the Syrian civil war conflict looks like, because if we did a whole recap on it, I mean, this is a 12-year war now, so it would take up tons and tons of time. But maybe, maybe one day I will do it. But today we're just going to go over the basics. So according to the UN, the Syrian civil war has cost 350,000 lives, which is the conservative estimate. But the real number is likely to be higher than 600,000 lives. So how did this conflict start? So even before the civil conflict officially kicked off, the Syrian citizenry were complaining about high unemployment, corruption, and a lack of political freedom under the Assad regime. And Assad took power in 2000 following the passing of his father. Pro-democracy demonstrations were taking place in neighboring Muslim countries. They erupted in the city of Dura. Assad, like an authoritarian government would, cracked down with deadly force. He thought that this crackdown would eliminate dissent, but it had the opposite effect. Nationwide protests demanding that President Bashar al-Assad step down erupted nationwide, and the crackdowns only continued. Opposition supporters took up arms to defend themselves, and then later decided to rid Assad's security forces from their territories. As this civil conflict unfolded, hundreds of groups came out of thin air and basically made the conflict more than a civil conflict. Foreign powers decided to pick sides. They sent money, military aid, and even soldiers into Syria. The situation took a turn for the worst when Islamic jihadists such as ISIS and Al-Qaeda decided to have their own ambitions in the region. Out of the conservative estimate that the UN provided, 26,727 victims were women, and another 27,126 victims were children. Despite international efforts to bring this conflict to a conclusion, all sides involved have largely been unwilling to stop the fighting. And in Syria, on top of that, this is going to be the last thing I say about Syria. Syria has a rich cultural history with a lot of historical artifacts in the area. And while ISIS had control over parts of Syria, they went actively destroying ancient artifacts and ancient cities that were still standing, like the city of Palmyra. And Syria is going to have a hard time coming back from their civil conflict. A lot of the large cities are destroyed. The city of Aleppo alone had 35,000 of their buildings destroyed. If you made it this far, click the like and subscription button. It would be greatly appreciated, guys. You are helping me grow this channel. And until next week, the next topics, stay tuned and catch me next week. All right.